was a good time for us to. Great. I want to just start by welcoming everybody and doing a quick review of our agenda for today. So as we just mentioned, we are recording and this will be on the webpage for BBF for this committee. So other people who aren't here today can also listen to it. I think I know everybody at this point, but my name is Crystal Michaud, Director of Child Care Licensing and co-chair with Tanya. Let's just take a second and do a quick introductions. Tanya, you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Tanya from Let's Grow Kids and co-chair with Crystal. Nice to see you all.
Beth?
Beth Truzansky, Deputy Director of Building Bright Futures. Good morning.
Matt?
Matt Levin, Executive Director of the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance. This is such a high-power group. I'm looking forward to hearing your conversation. So,
Lynn? And you're on mute, Lynn.
Thank you. Darn, I'm having trouble with audio today. Lynn Robbins, the Child Development Division, and also co-chair of the Professional Preparation and Development Committee.
Thanks. And I will just say that that's significant for us in that we share goal 3 of the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan with the PPD committee. So it's great that Lynn is able to attend each month. Paula.
Hi, I am Paula Bonney with Let's Grow Kids. I work on the Early Learning Initiative First Step Scholarship Program. Unfortunately, I'm only here until 10:30 because I have an ELI meeting then, but I'm glad to see everyone.
Well, thanks for joining. Patty.
I am Patty Smith, the Support Services and Inclusion Coordinator for Champlain Valley Head Start.
Welcome. Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda January, the Executive Director, Otter Creek Child Center in Middlebury, and one of the leaders of the Addison County Early Childhood Networks.
Wonderful. Diane.
Good morning. I'm Diane Nichols-Fleming, Early Childhood Program Coordinator for North Country Supervisory Union.
Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Bolger with the Child Development Division, Early Childhood and After School Systems Specialist.
Janet.
Hi guys, Janet McLaughlin, Executive Director at the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children.
Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Treya, Parent Child Center Northwestern Counseling and Support Services. I'm the Child and Adult Care Food Program Coordinator for 50 registered home child cares.
Cynthia.
Morning, everyone. Cynthia Green with Shelburne Farms and Vermont Feed. And sorry, my computer's acting up, so my video is not working.
No worries. Thanks for joining. Kate. Welcome.
Hey, morning, everyone. Kate Rogers, Agency of Education. I'm sitting in for Amy Murphy because she's on vacation. So glad to be here today. Thank you.
It's great to have you. So for today's agenda, we're going to continue the conversation and getting closer and closer to defining what does high quality services mean. We will review our policy recommendations for the 2020-21 year and what our accomplishments have been this past year in preparation for the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan Summit that is scheduled for July 26th. We'll do some preparations there and then also just continue to share updates around activities related to this year's work plan. So that's our plan for today. And last month in June when we met, we continued our discussion to create a definition of high quality services. Certainly this has been a challenging process as the need is for a definition that really applies to multiple service domains, mental health, early intervention, pre-kindergarten, childcare. And the goal is for BBF to have a definition that can be used with all of our committees and regional councils and state advisory council as it relates to the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan. Then we also received several updates from committee members, and we finished the meeting by taking time to discuss what COVID recovery means, and we started that discussion with feedback from the BBF Families and Communities Committee. So that's just a quick overview of what we had covered last time. So we'll jump right in here to continuing to flesh out a definition for high quality services. And I just want to start by just re-grounding us as we have a couple new faces to the conversation today, in that what we're trying to do is create a definition for high quality services. So that is, all services across domains. And that's been pretty tricky. And we've definitely dived into looking and talking about, how does that define for childcare as compared to education and some of the different service domains. And what I would love to do is share with you a draft definition. And this is something that we can pick apart in whatever way we want to today. And hopefully will move us closer to having a definition. I'm going to share my screen. I believe everybody can see my screen now. So what we've tried to do is, from all of the conversations that we've been having and all of the resources that people have named, to pull out at a high level the pieces that are the common threads around how high quality is defined for specific domains, so that we can reach a place where we have a definition that kind of serves at that higher level. So I'm going to sit quietly and let people read this for a minute. I do want to just clarify with Beth, when we record this and we're sharing a screen, does the recording cover the sharing of the screen, or for that purposes, at some point, should I read it out loud?
The recording captures the screen share.
Okay, thank you. So I'll give people a chance to read. Have I given enough time for everybody to be able to kind of read it and digest it? Some you might want to reread it a second time. I want to give enough silence if people need more. Matt?
I'm interested in I assume that this is the entire definition. So I'm really curious about the choice to draft this from the perspective of who is providing the service,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to mean, there are all sorts of, it's interesting. I don't have the Blue Ribbon Commission definition in my head, so I vaguely remember it, but seems like a very specific conscious choice. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about here, but that the first thing that, I mean, it's right at the first line. So right away, I'm thinking, ooh, what's that about? Because that feels very different to me than other definitions I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it is certainly a lead-in. It was an attempt to get a more defined definition for us to respond to, and certainly we might move away from it. We might keep it. That's fine. I'm interested to hear what people's thoughts are on it. Really, what I was trying to do was pull together the key pieces that overlay different services. So the Blue Ribbon Commission really talked specifically about childcare. Certainly one of the things that, Amy brought to the table was as it relates to education. So really trying to find where are the common themes, and when you're talking about evidence-based practices and you're talking about professional development, you really are kind of talking about the practitioner, but certainly not something we need to be committed to. There's certainly another way. But up until now, we haven't had kind of all the pieces pulled together in one place with which to respond to. So feel free to say like, okay, I think we need to shift this to that sentence or shift this out of this location and put it there. Other people's thoughts and reflections as you initially read? Diane?
So I appreciate that it's a framework, and to me, it identifies where the work needs to happen. So we need those systems, the infrastructure that defines the standards. We need it more clearly. I think to me, this is what I've grappled with is where are the guardrails for our providers so that they know, because quality is so diverse. So I appreciate this approach to it. And then it tells me, as I'm looking at programs, where can I fit in to help and to support it? And where are the systems that we need to create so that they're stronger, so that people know? Obviously the next step as an action step is how do we measure any of this? But again, the measuring is on what are we providing and making possible in terms of our system development as well.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that started surfacing within our conversations and within the different tools that have been identified during these conversations is that different services have standards, and there are measurement tools that are in place. So, as it relates, to pre-kindergarten, we have both the universal pre-kindergarten standards. We also have the Vermont Early Learning Standards, and those are the standards that service would utilize. And then one of the things that we're working towards is how to utilize the early MTSS framework. And that framework does include tools to assess practices to fidelity, right? So that's one example. Childcare is another example where, again, we have the Vermont Early Learning Standards, and then we have, our STARS system to assess quality. So hopefully with this definition, we've stepped back from prescribing those pieces and identified the fact that there needs to be those standards, there needs to be those measurement tools. Kate, you have your hand up? And you might be on.
All right. Yes, I found my unmute button. Yes. Thank you for this. I do appreciate the format that this has been put in, because it is more descriptive of what and how high quality practices can be implemented to fidelity of whichever measure we're discussing, whichever discipline we're discussing. I think where it may get a little bit convoluted a bit is when we talk about early childhood services rather than early childhood practice. And those practices are within the delivery of the services, if that makes sense. So as you said, Christelle, each of our specialists out there, mental health, speech and language, each of our specialists who provide services to children and their families really have measures, standards that they follow according to those disciplines. And that, we have to be, that the integrity of that needs to be upheld. We have our national competencies through NAEYC for practices, through DEC, the Division of Early Childhood, on competencies for our practitioners out there. And we're looking at that. We see that in the work that we're trying to move forward here in Vermont. So I think we're much clearer with this definition of what it may mean for high quality within the state, within the various components and practices, and such a broad range of services that are implemented by folks. But I see, even with the bullets, a build on the systemic nature of what this means, and that is critical. So I see it. I'm not sure if it's fully formed yet, but I think it's a really great start to things. But I do want to point back to when we talk about services as opposed to practice, I see a difference in what that means for ensuring high quality, no matter what service is being provided, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Kate. Janet, and then Amy.
I appreciate, I guess I agree with what Kate said, and I just wanted to offer that I do, and thinking about what Matt had said, I really like the focus on practitioners. I think that there's, as the frame in terms of saying that this is the most important thing is that you have practitioners who can do these that high quality services are made up of practitioners who use these practices. I like that frame. I think it also is important from, I think if you have to choose a frame, you have to choose one way to do it. And I think that for us, we just know how important the workforce is in terms of equality. We know that that's also an area where we need, increased focus and investment, and we need to deepen everybody's understanding around that in terms of being well prepared, continuing to be trained, making sure there's systems that are, that people are clear on standards or clear on how we're monitoring them, all of that sort of related to, I think those, having those as areas of emphasis right now feels very aligned with the kinds of the conversations that are happening right now and the areas of emphasis we want to have right now. So I'm all for that. I think the thing that, and then when Matt said that, I also, and Kate was saying that, I was trying to say, okay, so then what would be another way to do it, or another element of that? And so, the other questions you get to are right, a system that's actually well-resourced to do these things, right? Or, that you get to the physical infrastructure or the state systems or all that sort of stuff. But I really do like having it hang on practitioners who are well qualified and well supported, which is what I get from this. I get from all of these words. And so, then you're building the system around making sure that the people who are actually doing the work are qualified and supported. So I think, so that's my take on it. I do really like it. The only other thing that pops to mind is that this is a very technical definition, right? Folks who are not on this committee may not know, or folks who don't work in this field would not be able to interpret this very well. And so I don't know if there's a plain language version of this that we feel like we would want to have, or, you know, right, you couldn't really bring this definition probably to the Families and Communities Committee and say, what do you think? Did we get it? Right? So I just wanted to flag that, you know, as we're talking about, you know, emphasizing diversity, equity, inclusion, you know, being linguistically accessible, all of that, that this definition is very precise, but isn't necessarily the most accessible. And that may be just fine for the purposes of this committee, but we just need to make sure that we're thoughtful about how we would use it in other contexts.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Janet. And one of the things that I think of as you were talking is, if this is something that's going to be embraced by BBF, I think that when we have a draft that we feel solid about, we ask Beth, you know, to what extent can she help us or guide us in bringing it to the other committees and the regional councils and the state advisory council. I think it's something that is bigger than us, but certainly fits with a place for us to do some groundwork to give people something to continue forward with and finalize. Does that fit for you, Beth? And how maybe you envision this happening as well?
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of bringing it to families and communities in particular. I also think about, you know, how would we measure this, right? Are there aspects that are measurable that of information we're already collecting?
Mm-hmm. Amy, and then Linda, and then Cynthia.
Hi, thanks. So I also, I'm looking at my notes because I was taking notes as I was reading. I also really like the focus on early childhood professionals, on our practitioners. I really appreciate the language, each and every child. It's that nod to the guiding principles. Mm-hmm. And that equity, diversity, and inclusion are certainly in here explicitly in the fourth bullet and in the second bullet as well. As I was reading, I was wishing to see some words that may be implied here, or maybe we want to highlight or think about highlighting and strengthening. One is leadership. And the reason I think about that is because we're not just talking about quality services, we're talking about high quality services. And so the kind of leadership that ensures a solid business structure and ensures that organizational infrastructure. I would love to see something, maybe think about whether we want to strengthen that. Continuous quality improvement is another phrase, and actually that sort of brings me to wondering what we mean by working with an organizational infrastructure. Are we talking about the organizations themselves? How does that apply? If we are, how does that apply with family childcare providers? Or are we talking about the QRI? You know, what are we talking about in terms of that? What would be the definition? And then the only other thing, again, going back to high quality early childhood services, the services don't really use the practitioners. The services are delivered by practitioners or include practitioners. I'm not sure that use kind of jumped out to me and didn't feel like the right word there to convey what we might be thinking.
What was the word it used? Didn't really resonate with you, but it sounded like you might have had a different word choice.
Yeah, I mean, you could go with something like include, although that's a little bit weak. But really, the practitioners are, and maybe this isn't the right word either, but the sense of it is that the practitioners are delivering these services or partnering with families to, you know, engage them in these services. So I'm not sure exactly how to say it, but you know, high quality early childhood services are delivered by practitioners who, something like that.
Thank you, Amy.
Yep.
Linda.
Hi. So I think for I am not a wordsmith. It sounds good. The word that I am stuck on is practitioners. I don't know if the early childhood field, the teachers, the people doing the bulk of the work would see themselves in that word. And I also just think about that language in general. Just recalling a couple years ago when I was testifying, and there were some legislators being like, okay, what are you? Are you educators? Are you providers? Are you, right? Like we haven't come up, we don't have the right language to define us as a field, and people use different terms all the time. This isn't a term that the general early childhood population uses, and so I would worry that that teachers wouldn't see themselves, that they would read this and think about the OTs and the PTs and the EI and all those other people that come in and support us, but not necessarily us.
And if we replace the word practitioners with professionals, I'm just curious if that is a broad enough word that could be used across different service domains, but carries an essence where people would feel they could see themselves in it.
I think for the people doing direct service day in and day out, they would see themselves more in the word professional than practitioner.
Great.
And if we said early childhood professionals, is that too limiting?
It's not for me, but I think this is broader than that, right? Like I think we're talking about all those support systems as well.
Right. Because then I question if folks that aren't early childhood providers, as that definition that we think of in our head, the other folks won't see themselves in that definition. If you work at maybe CIS or mental,
So this is really good feedback so far. We're talking about how to have this be a little bit easier read, like where can we use some plain language? Where can we still use some terms that are inclusive, but also are high enough level term that people see themselves and understand that this applies to their work. So I've taken down some notes regarding that. Cynthia?
Thanks, Crystal. I also really appreciate the framing and the focus on practitioners or professionals. I am curious, so after reading it a couple times, I popped back into the agenda to take a look at the goal, the vision, and then the objectives. And so sort of looking at language sort of comparison to try to figure out how can we use similar language from the action plan to help it tie together and resonate. So that's just an observation I have. And then a sort of clarifying question I have is in the vision for the action plan, it says the ultimate goal is that the early childhood system is accessible, equitable, high quality, and meets the needs of each and every child. And so my question of clarity is, when we're trying to define high quality, is this just a subset definition to meet that particular language? Or how does that tie into the other components of the vision and the goal around accessibility, equity, and diversity? So I'm just curious, I'm pondering that. And because I can't help but offer a solution, darn it, I'm an early childhood provider at heart, right? So I'm going to take one more leap. And so then I was thinking, as I'm looking at the definition, I did wonder about high quality early childhood services, and then launch into a section that's about the, deliver services through practitioners or professionals, whatever the language is, that are well prepared and continue with that. But then there's a section that would then relate back to the vision, which is there might be a section about accessibility, about equity, and of course, each and every is woven throughout. So those were just some observations that I had to try to think about this at that really high level, but tying it back to some of the language that's been used for a long time in the Early Childhood Action Plan.
Cynthia, you have some formatting ideas. Would you mind sending those along to me after this meeting to see how we can incorporate them?
Absolutely.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. And this question really came up as a result of, well, what does high quality mean? Recognizing that high quality is one of several components of what's in the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan. So it is designed to try to answer that question. And I think, Cynthia, as you were talking, I was thinking, and you're right, how do you define quality, the word quality, without also talking about accessibility and affordability and the other aspects? So do we define it separate from that, or do we find it in relation to that? I think that's a good question for us to grapple with. So thanks for highlighting that. Lynn.
Hi, yes, I think this is great, and I appreciate the conversation that's been going on around this. I echo a lot of the sentiments that have already been expressed. My comment was more on the second bullet. I think it sounds a little too passive for me about just receiving ongoing professional development, and I'd like something a little more active, including reflective practice and so forth, to be stated in that second bullet. To show that the person is doing a little bit more self-assessment on their competencies and so forth. So I would like to see a little bit more added to that second bullet.
And Lynn, do you mind sending those suggestions to me as well? That would be great.
Yep.
And that might also tie into Amy's point around the continuous quality improvement aspect of this. There's an element there, and I think that there's also an element that might fit within the fourth bullet too. Matt?
Just wondering about the answer to the question I posed in the chat. What is in the first sentence, what does services mean? And what I'm getting at is, and this is relevant to our coalition since we're across all different service areas and across policy areas, integrated system of services, etc. If services in this case, and I want to be careful here, I don't mean to be negative, if it's not a euphemism, but if it's a replacement for early care and education or childcare or what have you, I would prefer we say that, because to me, this definition then needs to get shopped to all of my folks who work in the chat, all my folks who work in other service areas to say, so do you agree with that? Because we're speaking on behalf of all these other practitioners who work in other disciplines besides childcare, early care, and education. So I don't want to stop progress here, but this is a pretty significant word choice issue for me representing a larger cast of characters.
Yeah, that's a great point. So in our Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan, services is inclusive of childcare, mental health, education. It really is talking about services as a whole that families and children would receive. And so, we would refer people back to our VECAP, understand that this is a high level definition of high quality. And it really speaks to the, I think, significance of the fourth bullet, that it's happening within an organizational infrastructure that does define standards, and in a way that those standards can be measured, because that's where you're going to see the specific tie-in, right? So if it's a childcare program, are they adhering to the standards that are designed to support childcare services, high quality childcare services? Are they participating in measures that are then, assessing the level of quality? And I use that as one example, but that hopefully this language, and I do think to your point, Matt, we do need to share this more broadly when we have a working definition that we feel good to really hone and work on and see what does everything that we intended to fall within it. So when we go to our colleagues at Department of Mental Health and mental health practitioners, did they see that this fits within how their standards and their measures for what's high quality for mental health services? And we'll have to test that out and probably do some more tweaks if we find some things that are missing and or things that exclude unintentionally. I see Cynthia and Lynn's hands up. I'm not sure if those are new or not, so I'm going to go to Patty first.
Thank you. So I am looking at the word transdisciplinary collaboration, and I love that. That was one of the things that I had mentioned a little bit at the last meeting, that idea about how do all of the different pieces fit together, and understanding, all of the different types of services and providers and organizations and things that are there to support children that are in your program. So I'm wondering how it relates to the rest of the sentence, the child data, family support and engagement. And I'm wondering if people think that collaboration and interdisciplinary opportunities just for sharing and information, like conversations, like around when we talk about something, do we mean the same thing? Those kinds of conversations. So I wondered if it could be a bullet point all on its own and have a little bit more around understanding and working within the other parts of the system that you are a part of as a provider in early childhood education.
That's a great question, Patty, and I actually would struggled with whether or not it fit there, or to what extent would it might fit better within the fourth bullet, or to your point, should it be its own bullet? Would love to hear a little bit more thinking on that. And I'm happy to go to Kate first and then kind of circle back to Patty or anybody else that want to share additional ideas on that. And then want to talk about our next steps, because I think we have, our next agenda item we want to go to. But Kate?
Yes, thank you, Christelle. Patty, thank you for pointing that out. I think that's a really important piece. That transdisciplinary collaboration may not go in this bullet, but it may go in a bullet that describes the leadership and partnership of a system to work together in terms of ensuring the implementation of best practice, no matter who is delivering that service, right? I agree with that totally. Relying on child data is not alone in itself. I would actually support or suggest, I should say, adding a little bit to this data bullet. We rely on systems level data, we rely on teacher level data, and we rely on child level data. So there's 3 points of data that we really need to consider within this, and any decisions that are made in terms of high quality or whatever, and for continuous improvement, are data driven. And if we have those pieces in here, that would boost that, I believe, anyway.
Great, I captured that, thank you. So if anybody has, over the next week, if anybody has any additional, word choices or changes or ways that we can make this better, I'm happy to collect those and see how best to integrate them. I feel like we're getting closer and closer. I know this is, a conversation we keep circling back to. but this is something that's going to live on into the future and hopefully ground some of our conversations and help us with things like developing work plans and knowing when to add an activity to the work plan or remove an activity. And what are we looking at the data for, from what perspective? So I appreciate that we're really grappling with this. Tanya, could you, if I send this to you, could you send this out to everybody so people will have a written copy of it as well? And I'm not sure, I was not able to see the chats, so I'm not sure if there's anything from the chat that we haven't now captured.
I think we addressed everyone. I don't think we got them all.
Okay. Great. So I want to go to our agenda. And it looks like my copy of the agenda has gone a little wonky. So I'm going to open it again. Tanya, could you tell me what the next thing on our agenda is? It looks like Microsoft Word is not wanting to work.
We want to start our policy recommendation and a compliments.
That's right. Thank
Yep.
you. Here we go. And we were going to have Drake Turner join us from Let's Grow Kids. Has Drake had a chance to join as of yet?
Yes, Drake is here. Good morning, Drake. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, everyone. I feel like there's a lot of folks in this Zoom call I just haven't seen in a while, so it's nice to see you and see other folks who I haven't seen before. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we are recording this. Thanks for joining us, and wanted to kind of turn to you first to share a little bit with us. And for those who might not know you, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Sure, great, thank you. Yeah, so my name's Drake Turner. I'm the policy manager at Let's Grow Kids. And Tanya talked to me earlier this week about kind of giving a hopefully quick recap of really what happened with H171 this year. And I know a lot of folks have been really deeply involved in the passage of that legislation and in contributing to really what happened and what informed so much of that process. But I also know that a lot of that information can fly out of your head at the end of the legislative session. And there were a number of changes and tweaks, and always a lot happens as we approach the time when decisions are made. So I do want to just take a couple of minutes to really reflect on the accomplishment of all of these folks and sort of the wider early care and education advocacy community in making H171, which is, we have been calling it the child care bill, such a success with 179 yes votes out of 180 legislators, which is a pretty remarkable achievement. That doesn't happen all the time. So I'm going to quickly go through what is in the bill, what the bill sets up, and then also if folks have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm going to pop a quick link in the chat to the policy page on our website, which has some resources. We also have, I think this group might be interested, it's not on the website, but we have a more detailed breakdown of the bill that I can share with Tanya to share with you all. But essentially, H171 makes some real immediate needed investments in our state's early care and education system. It also sets legislative intent and previews future work of the legislature, including a couple of studies, some of which are really getting underway right now, and others to come, to really guide our future work together to continue transforming Vermont's childcare system, which we all know is super important. And there's just a lot of momentum and support behind, outside of the advocacy community as well. I think folks really understand more deeply than ever before just how crucial childcare is to the health and well-being of our young children, of families, and of our state as a whole. So I'll start with the more immediate investments in the bill and then build out from there. And a lot of this really was informed by the VECAP goals and priorities that you all have worked on for years. So much of the groundwork that has made this bill successful, is really thanks to you all. And really what has guided our work on this bill is a focus on family affordability and the early childhood education workforce. So those are a couple of the real buckets where there's immediate investment, including on the family affordability side, the bill appropriates $5.5 million around in implementing year 3 of the CCFAP redesign, which is we're really excited about. And I'm sure Crystal and others can speak more to that as well. I know that there's a lot of work underway there, but what it really means is we're switching from a per child copay to a per family copay, which is really changing the way CCFAP works in Vermont. And what it means is, there's also increasing income limits and making more folks eligible for the program. But at the end of the day, more Vermont families are going to pay less out of pocket for childcare. More families are going to be eligible for childcare support, and programs are many programs will receive higher reimbursements for the work that they do. And hand in hand with that really exciting investment, there's also $4.5 million that will be supporting a redesign of our childcare IT infrastructure. And I know there's a lot underway with that as well. The first module of that IT redesign is what's going to make that change in CCFAP possible. And I think, I don't need to talk about why IT investments are so important and needed, but we're really excited to see what happens with this CDD information system. I know there's a lot of work going on right now to engage stakeholders, childcare providers and families, and making sure that system, works as well as possible for families moving forward and for programs. So that's really exciting too. And that's a multi-year investment. So the first module will happen first, and there's a lot more to come. And there also are a number of investments in the bill to support our current early childhood education workforce and also to recruit new folks into the field. And what the bill doesn't do right now is address wages for early childhood educators. That's a conversation that we're looking forward to having in the coming years because we know how important it is. But what happens more immediately is there's $2.5 million in H-171 to support our current workforce, as I mentioned, and to recruit new early childhood educators. And that breaks down into 3 main buckets. So there's $300,000 to support current scholarships for current early childhood educators, $400,000 to establish a new scholarship program for prospective early childhood educators, and then $1.8 million would go toward establishing another new program. This time it's a student loan repayment support program for folks who have graduated in the past 5 years and are currently working in the field. So there's a lot more to come on those programs. It's really exciting when something like that passes, but then programs need to be stood up, and the state needs to contract with folks to make those programs happen. So we don't have so much detail on a lot of the nitty gritty, but we'll have more information. Linda, that's a good question. I can see if I have more of an answer for you now, but as of this moment, no, I don't know. But we know that folks are really excited, and once we have more information, we'll share it. But for now, we know that money will go toward supporting our really essential early childhood educators. They're also in the bill. Oh, Janet, do you see your hand up?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to offer that if making sure I understand Linda's questions properly, but the Vermont State Colleges has money that specifically can support folks who are taking the ECE in specific ECE programs at NVU and at Castleton and at CCV, but they're and that would come out of the allocation that Vermont State Colleges gets, which is different than these other scholarship dollars.
So it's 2 pots of money.
They're 2 different pots of money. One of the things we're working, yes, no, it is. I mean, really, if anybody is interested and it has been thinking that this is the time to like advance their credentials or training within early childhood education, like there's never been more money, because it's not just that money that's in H-171. It's also EC was also prioritized, and there's other scholarship programs that, you know, like for people who have household incomes less than $50,000, that might work for them as well. So the state's still working a little bit on how to stack a couple of things, because the legislation does say theoretically H-71 dollars should be used before, or designated funds for early childhood educators should be used before the more general VSAC or Vermont State Colleges or VSAC money, but the dollars from H-71 haven't been allocated yet. So people should but people, like, no matter what, like there is money, and people should be like, you know, like figure out what your educational pathway is, and figure out, and then talk to your financial aid folks, and like those people's job is to guide folks to the right resources. And I think that they're working really hard and making sure that they're coordinating all of that. So that every student is supported like to the full extent that these programs can do it. So sorry, I got on a little bit of soapbox, but I feel like it's like July, so people need to start now if they want to be enrolled in the fall.
It's super helpful, right? Because folks are trying to plan, and we're also trying to figure out how to operationalize all of the things that were just really a concept before. So it's a shift in mindset, and it's the summer, so there's a lot for us to all figure out together. But luckily, it's about how do we make sure folks know about all of the different opportunities that are available to them. It's a much more exciting conversation to have. I think we'll all, you know, Janet and others will continue to collaborate to make sure we both are talking about the same things and communicating them effectively out to the field. But there's a lot more to come there. And speaking of, you know, a lot of possibility and money, you know, we got through the American Rescue Plan. Man, are there a lot of similar acronyms, but federal legislation passed earlier this year that means that $47 million approximately is coming into Vermont to support childcare. So talk about a lot of possibility. There's a lot of really exciting stuff to come. And so another part of the bill has CDD working with stakeholders to make sure that the plans for that $47 million are really reflecting needs in the field, and that there's a really great conversation, I know, planned for tomorrow to dig into that. So I'm sure folks here are aware, but if you aren't already, I know BBF and CDD are really excited to facilitate that conversation. The legislature also came up with a number of sort of goals and priorities for CDD to look at and how to appropriate those funds. But there's just a lot of possibility for over the next few years for us to really continue to stabilize and also, you know, figure out what type of transformational work we can do with those federal dollars. And then the last thing I'll talk about, and then I'll shut up, is there, as I said, there's a lot of sort of more immediate, shorter term stabilizing investments in the bill that are just so important to the future system we all, you know, want. There are also some reports and studies that the bill sets in motion now that will guide future work. So there's a childcare and early education systems analysis, which BBF, in consultation with a lot of other partners, has been hard at work on to work with a consultant essentially to conduct an analysis of our current system. You know, where are the strengths, where are there opportunities, where are there gaps? That is a really exciting process that I know has already started and has to, because everything's on a pretty tight timeline. And the final report for that is due back next summer. There's also a study that CDD will be doing about what it would mean to shift to a sort of true enrollment-based model in CCFAP. That's also information that's due back to the legislature next summer. And then the third sort of study in the bill is a financing study. So that has not started yet and wouldn't start until next summer, July 1st of next year. But in the bill, the legislature directs the Joint Fiscal Office to contract with a consultant to study the cost and of implementing a childcare system that in which no family spends more than 10% of their gross annual income on care, in which early childhood educators receive compensation that is commensurate with their peers in other fields, and a system that uses a cost of care model in CCFAP rather than a market rate model to determine payments to programs. So again, a lot to come. Information from these other studies will inform that one. And JFO has been instructed to contract with a consultant no later than July 1st of next year, with a report back due in January of 2023. So there are a lot of moving pieces here, but a lot of really exciting investments and previews of exciting future work to do together. And again, you know, the success of H171 is just the success of you all, really. It was an incredible achievement in the legislature. And I think a lot of legislators are really committed to the work to come, not just passing one bill. We know that this is a really incredible achievement, but for it to really, you know, bring about the transformational change we want, we got to keep going. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know. And thanks for listening to me ramble.
Thanks so much for coming and joining us and sharing it from your perspective. Matt has been keeping us informed and giving us updates, and at times has said, you may not just want to hear from me. So I appreciate, Drake, you coming and giving us, you know, an update from the perspective with which you bring from Let's Grow Kids. I recognize it's an advocacy such as Matt's organization, but yeah, it's also unique in terms of its focus. So thank you. Beth, I also want to give you an opportunity to just see if there's anything you want to share for an update regarding this as it relates to BBF's work.
Yeah, I mean, Drake gave you the high level. So just some of the specifics around, you know, BBF issued a RFP for the systems analysis consultant. Those are due on Monday. So that will get underway in the next month. We're super excited about it and have some, know that we anticipate some several bids from national consultants. So that's great. Also considering how do we keep this and other partners informed, and so considering, you know, if some VECAP committees could meet jointly to be able to receive an update from those consultants periodically. So we'll work that out to the best of our ability. We're trying not to establish new advisory groups whenever possible, but utilizing existing groups. I'm trying to think if, I think that's kind of the most timely update, and excited to see what information comes that will help inform our work.
So this is probably a good segue into, you know, what our committee had elevated for policy recommendations that had been adopted by the State Advisory Council for this 2020-2021 year, work plan year. There was two ways that we had policy recommendations that focused on supporting the early childhood workforce. One was the support education costs and compensation for early childhood workforce, including scholarships, loan repayment, and wage supplementation. And the second was the continued investments in redesigning the state's Child Care Financial Assistance Program, or CCFAP. So, and those have certainly the first one around supporting the early childhood workforce through compensation and educational supports, was something that our committee for the last couple of years have continued to bring forward. And in each time we've seen progress made. So just wanted to identify those as we have some new people present and didn't know if everybody had that same level of knowledge in terms of what we had put forward at the beginning of this implementation year, and wanted to also just open it up as an opportunity to, if people have questions about any of those things. We certainly have Matt and Drake and Beth here that can help, but also want to give us a chance to brainstorm what other accomplishments we've seen this year from, you know, what we've done.
And Drake is going to hop off soon. Does anyone have any Drake specific questions before she has to jump off to the next thing? No.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Drake.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that you all humoring. You've probably heard this spiel like 12,000 times. We appreciate you. Have a great morning.
Thank
You
you.
too. Thank you.
This has certainly been exciting. I think last year when, well, I guess it wasn't last year, was it, Beth? It was probably 2 years ago at our summit, we shared our accomplishments around some of this work and what some of the legislative outcome had been of that. And here we are with more accomplishments regarding it. So it's just so exciting. Matt.
So just thinking ahead, Crystal, to what the plan is here, I'm curious to what extent this group thinks it would be important to have for priorities for moving ahead, watching the implementation of all the stuff that is being queued up. Now, Crystal, I don't want to suggest that your shop needs a great deal of oversight. It isn't intended to be. I just realized, I'm like, wait a minute, Crystal's the one who's doing all the implementation. So, but there's a lot of moving parts, right? I mean, and I don't think anyone has doubts. I'm not suggesting that people have doubts. I don't want to say it, but there's a lot of stuff happening, and it would be interesting to me to get a sense if that's something that folks feel like we need to keep watching for a while, or people like, nope, we're good. I mean, we're gonna keep watching, but we're good. Let's look ahead. I think it's an interesting jumping off point for the discussion, perhaps, about, so what should this group's priorities be for next year? So
yeah, Matt, I really appreciate you asking that question, because, you know, our role as a BBF committee is convene, monitor, support. And I think your question's spot on. To what extent as a committee do we want to monitor the progress that happens? And through what lens? What are we listening for when we're monitoring? It's a great question. What do people think about that? And I will say that our next meeting in August, we do want to spend time on talking about what will our priorities be for the 21-22 year. And I think this will be one of those questions that'll be good for us to continue to ponder. I was going to give homework, so we'll add this to the list. Because it'll be important when we come back to that August meeting that we've spent some time looking at the 5 objectives and really thinking about what do we know with everything that we've gained so far from these meetings, and what direction do we want to continue to go in for next year. And I think this is a good question to include in that thought process for ourselves. Diane?
Yeah, some of the things I'm wondering about, it's kind of, we've been so solely focused on being safe and healthy, and that isn't completely going away. But it's like we seem to be emerging a little bit, but then there's all these other opportunities and challenges. So the opportunities of this influx of money and so many changing, you know, it's not a shell game, but it's trying to keep track of where everything is and what it looks like. And then to me, another potential barrier, and it's actually where my mind went when Matt asked the question, was what do we know about the plan of restructuring and, you know, reorganizing, and what does that look like? And we're just wanting to keep all of the eyes on that, because if you are the people at the table, but then all of a sudden through a reorganization or a restructuring or whatever happens, those players begin to move around. How do we make sure the system is clearly identified as to what we're doing and working on, and that it doesn't, and then how do we advocate too for the work that's happening, and how we keep that transparency there as best as we can. So that would be helpful for me to know what are we thinking timeline wise for when that's going to become potentially back on the table for review, as to what does a restructure look like, and how does it support the work that we're moving forward to around CCFAP, as well as around professionalizing the industry in that.
Does anybody that's here today have any reflections on that question for Diane, or is that something that we should find out and bring to our next meeting as part of the work plan setting discussion?
Well, and I would say too that some of the work that we're doing, as you know, we're still the emergency response team, the school and childcare subcommittee. We're continuing to meet, and one of the things we're looking at in the Northeast Kingdom region is around capacity and looking to build that capacity. And so it's how do we gather all the eggs into one basket kind of a thing in order to share. And so one of the things we're trying to do too is to create a cheat sheet about what are some of the changes, because our providers and the professionals in the field have been working so hard just to be safe and to provide the best care they can for families and kids. And there's been a lot of behind the scenes moving. And so we want to be sure that as people are able to kind of come out of the cocoon a little bit, that they understand who are the people to go to, who are the resources. So I would say any of that information, because it has been sent out, but you don't know what you don't know. And when you go to look and you can't find it, what do you do? And so any helpful guidance as to where to look for that too, so that we can create these little sheets as reminders and opportunities for people to be able to grab hold of. A refrigerator list basically is what we're trying to do.
I guess I really like what you were saying, and I was thinking, I guess I am trying to think about the it's like how can we be helpful? I mean, right? Like, I mean, it was so sort of a silly like way to say it, but right, like how do we actually help implement things, right? So I think there is the part where it's like our goal as a committee, right, is to right, is to you know what I mean, is, you know, right, where we talked about sort of monitor and align and all of that. But I think if we can and to make sure that sort of the different folks within the system are doing the things that they said they were going to do, or they know what the other folks are doing. But I agree, I am like, gosh, it's with all these changes, is there some role in actually in supporting like effective implementation that our committee could play, or that, you know, by virtue, and it, again, like it sounds like Diane, I think your refrigerator list is like a really good example of something that's not, you know, it's not necessarily, it's not a, you know, multi-part research study. It's like something, you know, something that is doable for, you know, for a voluntary committee. And just thinking about what that is. And then the other thing that was on my mind is really just the connection to what Beth was saying in terms of these studies and things like that, and having our committee, you know, really being clear about what role our committee, you know, can, should, would want to play in helping inform some of the system's recommendations.
I just hope that any big changes, restructuring isn't done until after all the studies are complete and that are in H171. That's my hope. And you talk about emerging from the cocoon, and I feel like coming out of COVID has been as stressful as going into COVID. And we, on a couple Fridays ago, I sent out a letter to parents like, families are allowed back in the building and no masks for vaccinated people. And that Sunday I got a message that we had a positive case in the building and had to close for a week and push everything back a couple weeks. And so it's just like, and yet it feels like we're in this really weird place of like, not, the guidance is just so weird right now. And so knowing who to turn to, and like knowing that there is a support system and like people to reach out to, I feel like some of that was so heavy during the pandemic and it's kind of going away, and that but coming out has just been so stressful. Feeling like you're making the right decisions for community has been really hard. And the other thing that I'm really worried about is, and CDD did send out that email a week or so ago about the subsidy redesign, which was great. I'm still just worried about providers grasping that whole change and how to implement it and how to talk to families about it, and families really kind of understanding, because it's such a big shift. And so I just worry about that happening smoothly for people.
Linda, I really appreciate what you're sharing, both in terms of it's not any easier coming out of COVID as it was going in. It uses a lot of the same skills, but it's almost like they're new again. So that really resonates with me when you talk about that piece. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, we're developing a work plan that we want to make sure, I think, is continued to be grounded in what's happening with COVID. That's not a layer that's going away, even though we're reopening and relearning what our new normal may look like. So I think that's an important piece. And then that also acknowledges the number of significant changes that are kind of happening simultaneously. And to your point, how are providers and families and just all of us as a whole staying current and on top of, and then well interconnected about it. So I think you really captured that really well, Linda. Thanks. I also want to just acknowledge that we as a committee experienced change this year with Janet stepping out of the co-chair and Tanya stepping in. And we tried to do that as seamlessly as we could. I think it's been a little bumpy, at least it feels like on my end, as we're, reintegrating as co-chairs. But that is something that we have accomplished this year. I think we've also expanded our membership in important ways this year, and having new voices in the conversation and at the tables, which is, I think, really making these conversations more rich every time we're able to do that. So that's fantastic. And so I just want to kind of name that accomplishment as well, and just give us space to see if there's any other accomplishments that are ones we want to name. This is something we do every year at this time in preparation for the summit, is to reflect back for a moment.
I also, and the years are kind of running together. I think of COVID as a block of time, but we may have celebrated this last year, but thinking about how we really utilized this committee and some of the relationships that were built in this committee in terms of COVID response. And some of that happened in the committee. Some of it was, emergency response, smaller groups, but that stands out to me.
Well, and to that point, Beth, I think there was some really conscious choices that we made as a committee this year to reach out to, especially Families and Communities Committee, and to get feedback and to bring that forward here as part of our conversations. So I think that as well. Janet?
Yep, I was going to say that too. I felt like trying to work with that committee more, and then the other thing I felt like was valuable was that we, the way I feel like we created a comfortable space for each other especially during the summer and the fall, where we left enough space for us to have a little bit of processing time, a little bit more time to sort of say, to give us a little bit to have those. We still kept meeting, right, even though it was COVID, but we also used some of that time to sort of check in with each other, and to have that reflection in space, which I think was ultimately in those moments felt really valuable, and just overall was not hard to find, I felt like, especially during those, the days before, during a lot of those, I guess, for a long period of time.
I also feel like this was one of those years where we were able to move forward a little bit more with one of our work plan goals or activities around thinking about business supports. We had a panel. We also learned about First Children's Finance Organization and what they might have to offer Vermont, and thinking about where there's gaps in Vermont business support services. And so that's another piece. Gosh, when I think about this conversation, I think like we supported like at the COVID level, we, did some action planning there, there was, policy asks pieces that had just so much fruition come from them. It's amazing to really kind of think about. I appreciate us being able just to do this reflection. I'm super excited for the summit. And let's see, what's that date? July 26th at 1 o'clock, right, Beth?
That's right.
Do you want to just quickly share? Do you know what that format will be for the summit on the 26th, or are you still under development?
Both. No, I mean, I think we're using we'll do a virtual summit as we did last year, which is, so it's a 2-hour SAC/VCAP summit meeting, hopefully a broader participation with more VCAP members, regional council members, certainly SAC members. So all are invited. We'll take some time to celebrate accomplishments, which is why we're surveying, and asking for all VCAP committees to identify kind of where do you feel like, what do you want to celebrate, right? And then take stock of kind of how are we doing in terms of accomplishments towards VCAP priorities. And then what are the emerging needs for policy recommendations? And we've asked committees to come forward with concepts around policy recommendations. Again, we don't need refined language, but at least the concept, and then the ability to kind of, we'll break into some small groups as we did last year. VCAP leaders can give some background on kind of what the issue is, how it emerged, what the need or the gap is, and then a conversation with a broader stakeholder group about what is the need or around the policy recommendation, and that will inform building that language. So that's essentially the process, which is very similar to what we did last year. And, we have the final updated VCAP this year. So certainly noting that and encouraging people to review it if you have not yet already. So I can put the registration link in the chat, and would love for communication will go out probably today or tomorrow, kind of with a reminder and some more details, so that can be shared.
Thanks, Janet. Or Janet. Beth. All right. So as our next committee meeting will be on Thursday, August 12th. And then the meeting following that will be on September 9th at our August 12th meeting. We will really plan on, we'll have had the summit, we'll be able to give some reflections on how the summit, what we gained from the summit, and as it would relate to helping us develop our work plan for the next year. But that meeting will, be dedicated to really thinking about our work plan and developing it. At the September 9th meeting, we will have Valerie Wood, Lori Meyer, and Caitlin Northey from UVM come and present the early MTSS report, as well as the PIES recommendations for preventing suspension and expulsion. And PIES stands for promoting inclusion and exploring supports for children with specialized needs in the early childhood education setting. So they'll be sharing both the early MTSS report and findings, as well as the PIE's recommendations for preventing suspension and expulsion. We will be extending invites out for that September 9th meeting to other committees and regional councils, and we'll also plan on recording that. In terms of our August meeting, I think it would be really helpful for all of us to take some time in preparation for that meeting to really look at our 5 objectives within goal 3 and reflect on both, what this past year has had for accomplishments, and really consider, what we want to work on for this coming year. What are good next steps? It may be keeping some of those, those work plan items. It may be adding some new ones. It might be shifting the focus. And some of us might find it helpful to also take some time to review the VECAP data dashboard and really consider the data and what we can learn from that to help inform how we want to develop our work plan, keeping in mind the overlay of COVID and that we're still in recovery over the next year. And what does that mean? And how does we want that to inform our work plan development? So if we can take some time to really think and look at the data dashboard, I think that will help us with the development of our work plan next month. So for the last few minutes of our meeting, we wanted to give some space. If anybody had some updates that are relevant to share with each other, that ties back to our goal 3 and or our work plan. People are thinking, I do want to say, like, our numbers have dwindled as this meeting has happened. I'm impressed that so many people were able to attend today, being July. We don't tend to cancel the meetings in the summer. We do meet once a month, and so this has been great to have such a large group. And we might not have any updates, and that's fine too.
I kind of gave mine when I jumped in when Drake was talking, so just give the pitch on that. And Vermont AYC is going to work to make sure we get some good information out there. But this, the colleges are getting, and VSAC and are all working to get that information out to potential students a ton. But I want to, Vermont AYC is hoping to do, we're getting all our questions are from employers who are asking on behalf of their staff and wanting to be able to provide good advice there. So I think we're hoping to be able to do sort of a webinar later this month with the state colleges and VSAC and CCV, just to be able to help, help employers do a little bit more of the wayfinding for their staff that we know that they do. So people can stay tuned for that.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet.
I can give just one Head Start update that we are so happy about launching our early Head Start expansion programs in St. Albans, and 2 infant toddler classrooms and a Head Start classroom. And it's all moving along with, of course, our federal funding, but great support from Vermont partners. And so hoping for a fall launch.
That's so exciting. Congratulations.
I just want to give a shout out and appreciation to Michelle, who I don't sit at the same table very often, but thank you, Michelle, for stepping up to help with our FGI Regional Council over the last couple months with our staff transitions. So very much appreciated. Michelle's the kind of person who steps in to do whatever is needed, and that was for sure true in the last couple of months. We're in the midst of a hiring process for a new regional manager that will serve Chittenden, Franklin, and Grand Isle.
You're very welcome. It's been fine. Been on the council a long time, so.
I know.
And I'm very excited that you'll be hiring someone to take over and well, be able to do more than I'm able to do. I'm not able to give as much time as I'd like to the coordination.
All right. Well, I think we'll give people back a gift of time this morning. Thanks for coming together, and thanks so much for just continuing to work with us through developing a definition for high quality services. It's not an easy task. It wasn't an easy question when it was asked, and we all kind of looked at each other and didn't have an answer to the question. So I appreciate that we're working through it. I hope everybody has a great next couple of weeks and hope to see you at the summit.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.